Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Criterion Collectors. I'm your host, Tim Rosenberger, and today we're going to be discussing Criterion childhood films. Before we get into that, though, a few announcements and bits of business we need to talk about. First off, I do have a cough. I am sick again, so if you hear some coughing during this, that is why. I will try to edit around it and mute my microphone so there's as little of that as possible, but it will probably seep in here and there. Secondly, I try to not have real world stuff get into podcasts very much, so this can be a nice little escape from you. But speaking of being sick, please wash your hands right now, stay inside when you can, and follow health official rules. Okay, it's very important. Please follow those guidelines so we can all go outside again sooner rather than later. And the third announcement is, I said I was the host at the beginning of this, but I'm not going to be able to say that any longer because now I'm going to be the co-host of the podcast. Some of you who have listened to the past two episodes know that we've had the same guest for those two episodes. Well, that guest, Rosalie Lewis, is now going to be the co-host. Rosalie, thank you for saying yes to that.
I'm super excited to be a co-host of this show. I've been a long-time lover of all things Criterion and also all things podcast. So this is just bringing together two things that I love very much already. And I'm super excited. Thank you, Tim, for extending the opportunity. And I'm excited to see where this takes us and what films we can discuss in the future.
I'm very excited about it as well. I could not have been more excited that you said yes. And I think we have a bright future with this.
So as Tim mentioned, the films that we are talking about today are all childhood related in some way or another, and they kind of run the gamut. So we start out with Good Morning, which is a 1959 film from Japan. Then we'll be talking about Kes, which is a film from, I believe, 1969, and that one is set in England. And then we move into Spain with Spirit of the Beehive, which came out in 1973. So something from three different countries, three different time periods, and I think we'll have a lot to discuss today. So the very first film that we're going to be discussing is Good Morning. And this one is arguably the funniest of the three films. It is Yasujirō Ozu's film, and it's actually a remake of his own movie. He made a silent film in 1932 called I Was Born But, and this is sort of a remake of that. It focuses on a group of boys who are obsessed with television. They don't have their own TV, but they always run to the neighbor's house to watch their favorite sumo wrestling matches, and they are begging their parents to get TV. Their parents think it's a huge waste of time and they want to spend the money on something a little more responsible, and they think the boys are just too silly. And at some point, two of the boys' brothers decide to basically stop talking until their parents comply with their wishes. So a lot of funny things ensue as a result of that, and I found this one really enjoyable. You have the cast here of Keiji Sada, Yoshiko Kuga, Chiso Ryu, Kuniku Miyake, Haruko Sugimura, and quite a few others. It's a great ensemble piece, and the adults do play quite a part here, but the focus is definitely on the kids, and it seems like it's mainly from the kids' perspective. What did you think of this one, Tim?
I thought it was different. I mean, I like the light tone of it. I like that it focuses on, I mean, the TV, mainly the TV that they want to watch is sumo wrestling. There's a sumo wrestling tournament, which I thought was interesting and kind of, there probably is a film like this, but I would almost like to see a film focused on sumo wrestling because it seems such a unmined subject matter for a film. But anyway, there probably is some films, especially some Japanese films about that. But no, I liked it because this came out in 1959. I don't know when the TV craze really started in Japan. I mean, obviously in America it was kind of late 40s and then more into the 50s. So I don't know how new of a thing TV is there, but I liked the kind of differing points of view of approaching TV because the kids are really just they don't really think much about it at all. They're just thinking of it as, hey, this is a way we can watch our sumo wrestling. While the parents and really the adults that talk about it really they don't think very highly of it. All the ones that do talk about it basically say that's going to make the generation who are growing up with it stupid. And it's just kind of interesting to see the different points of view on that. And I'm sure there's more cultural context there that I'm not aware of since I'm not Japanese. I don't know enough about that culture to maybe understand the older generation and maybe they're kind of prejudiced against it as well as I might if I was more versed in it.
Yeah, it's interesting because the adults in the movie seem to look unfavorably on any unnecessary expenditure of money. And I think maybe coming out of the 40s where, 30s and 40s, even in the US, there was a depression. And I'm sure, that Japan probably suffered after World War II economically. There seems to be a lot of judgment even at the neighbor who buys herself a new washing machine. The neighborhood ladies are all gossiping about where she got the money to do that and starting rumors about how she's somehow dipping into their women's club dues and all sorts of things come out about that. And there's also judgment about the couple that has the TV and they're, talking behind closed hands and closed doors about, I think she's a cabaret dancer, and they just lay around in their pajamas all day, and just, lots of judginess, lots of petty gossip about the family that has the TV. So there definitely seems to be a strong point of view from the older folks in the neighborhood that this is not the way to go.
Did you like the, because there's kind of the subplot, you hinted at it, the subplot of, in the beginning parts of the film, about there's a women's club and for a little while they don't know where some of the money for the club went. I think the mother of the two main boys said that she gave it to the head person, but the head person apparently didn't get it, and they think the mother did something nefarious with it or whatever. And so the early parts of the film kind of deal with these rumors of did she buy something with it or not, and some humor is mined from that, and some it kind of comes back more near the end of the film and blah blah blah. Did you like that, or because when I was watching that I felt it was maybe a bit of a distraction from the main plot in a way that didn't feel satisfying enough to distract from the main, hey, are we going to get a TV, or are we not going to get a TV thing, which I found the more interesting storyline.
I was definitely more entertained by the kids, but I think what I liked about it was the parallel between these adults who, again, are, kind of casting aspersions on their neighbors, but they're also like casting aspersions on the kids for wanting to get a TV. So it's almost like who is ultimately the more irresponsible ones, the adults or the kids? They all kind of have their flaws, and they all are judging each other, and the kids are just trying to have fun and watch their sumo wrestling. So I think it was maybe some social commentary by showing that little situation between the parents and, the neighbors. And it also kind of shows what a neighborhood there was like, because their houses are all kind of connected. You can see basically the whole neighborhood from one end of it's not even a street, it's more like like a grassy area or something, and then like they go up a hill and they're out of there. So it's a very small little neighborhood, and they're all kind of up in each other's business. So I guess it all tied together for me. It just kind of set the scene.
I do think there's also, it seems to be, thinking about it now, there seems to be this, I don't know if you would say the theme, but this thing about adults maybe overthinking things, and whereas the kids don't really, or if the kids are thinking deep, like the older kid at one point, the title kind of comes from this speech that the older of the two sons have, where he's talking about the kind of stupid rituals that adults have about, hey, you have to say good morning, and how's the weather, blah, 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 all this silly kind of stuff.
Good Morning is very much concerned with the social value of everyday courtesies.
Ohayo. 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 Konnichiwa. 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 Sayonara. 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 I love you.
Which the children object to, but the adults realise are essential to allow everyone to rub along together. Even if they sometimes take politeness a bit too far.
But so he's thinking about it in a more deep way that seems to kind of make sense, whereas the adults kind of are, maybe overthinking, it's going to make our kids stupid. Or at one point when there's the silent treatments going on, the kids don't say hi to the neighbor, so then the neighbor thinks that the mother told them not to do that because she's mad at them and stuff. So there's this kind of just worrying too much a certain extent pettiness going on amongst the adults, where maybe adults worry too much about some of these things and shouldn't read too much into the stuff that goes on in their daily lives.
Right. Well, I thought it was a really stark contrast between the way that kids think and behave versus the way the adults think and behave, and how they lose some of the meaning in their communications. Because you're right, like the adults are full of pleasantries, just like the son points out. And he kind of throws a little temper tantrum, and his dad says, "You kids are making too much noise." And he's like, "No, the adults are the ones making too much noise. It's always good night, good morning, hello." And it's true, because the adults, even if they have something else on their minds, like suspecting their neighbor of stealing, or like, one of the characters perhaps harboring romantic feelings towards another, they never say what they actually mean. They're just kind of saying these pleasantries. So, the kids not speaking almost highlights even more the pointlessness of a lot of the adults' communication. And I thought that was an interesting point that I think Ozu is definitely making.
Yeah, and they just can't be direct with each other. And that's kind of, because there is this romantic subplot with, I think it's the kids, he's teaching them English, and there's a woman who I forget kind of her relation to them, but he basically has a romantic interest in her, but he can't say anything meaningful to her. He can only say, like you said, pleasantries and
talk about the weather.
Yeah, talk about the weather, and he can't just say important things, even after one of the adult characters says, well, eventually you have to, it's hard to say, the important things sometimes, or something like that. And they just can't be like, say, hey, let's go on a date or something. They can't be direct. But yeah, I found that, it is kind of an interesting subplot that isn't, I think, talked about much in movies. And this was kind of a nice, interesting way and venue or whatever to talk about those types of things. And I think a kid's point of view is the best, because they haven't learned all of society's kind of rules yet, and so therefore they haven't learned this stupid stuff too.
Exactly. They don't really care about being polite. I mean, their whole joy in life is poking each other in the forehead and farting. So, that's where they're at. That's their form of communication with each other. I think this is funny. It's the one kids movie or childhood movie that we watched out of the three that has fart jokes, which, is something that is often known to be a more juvenile form of humor, but I appreciated that at least one of the films had that in it, because it just happens very organically, and it's a really funny recurring motif in this movie.
I mean, I think it's the first joke, and I think it might be the first thing you really hear is the fart, is somebody farting.
His farts are uniquely non-naturalistic, almost musical. It takes a second to even figure out what the noises are meant to represent. This stylization, which isn't present in any other Ozu sound effect, seems to be a way of being discreet and tasteful, while still finding puerile amusement in cheap bottom jokes.
And there's also a good running gag. The two boys are learning English, and at one point at the beginning of the film, the two boys are leaving for school, I think, and the mother says, bye, and the older kid says something in English like see ya or something, and then the younger son just says I love you, and then they leave. And then, they're going across to study, air quotes, when they're really just going to watch more sumo wrestling. And then when they have to then leave the neighbor's house who's doing the sumo wrestling, the older kid says see ya, and then the younger kid again just says I love you, and he does that a few times in the movie just to whoever he's saying goodbye to, whether he knows them very well or not. And that was kind of a nice little thing I liked.
Even boys can use meaningless phrases.
Of course, madam. I love you. Baka ne.
When I think of the youngest boy saying, I love you, under all circumstances, it just seems to be like the appropriate thing he'll say. He's really as much a victim of the emptiness of language as anybody, because he doesn't know what that means, really. He says it as hello, goodbye, I like you, whatever.
I love you.
What did you think about the kid actors? I thought that they were very believable and very naturalistic. I don't know too much about their backgrounds, but as far as kid actors go, I was pretty impressed. How about you?
I like them. I think it's easier for child actors to get by with me when it's a non-English speaking film, just because I can't hear the subtleties in the language and stuff. So if a kid is having a bad line reading, I'm less in Japanese or Spanish or whatever, I'm less likely to notice it. But no, in general, though, I like them. I think they didn't have the signs when you suffer from child acting. They weren't stilted. They didn't have low energy. The only one who was kind of low energy maybe was the younger son, but he made that work, and he was cute enough that it really wasn't a problem.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a bit about the visuals of the film. Again, it's, an Ozu film, which I think he's very well known for a specific style. And when I was watching this, I noticed how a lot of the shots seem to be very centered. and it reminded me of Wes Anderson, who I'm sure is borrowing it from Ozu. The other thing that I noticed was that he held the camera still quite often and just sort of let the action happen either in the background or the foreground versus following the action with the camera. And I think that technique isn't used as much now. We see a lot more quick cuts and edits and the camera moving around really quickly. But whether it was a result of practical decision or budgetary, or that's just the way he likes to work, I thought it turned out really cool. I like the way that it looked.
Yeah, I have some other of his films that I still need to watch. I own some of them because they looked interesting, but this is the first one of his that I've actually sat down and seen. So I don't know if this is what you just said is common in his films or not, if he does this for all his films or if he did this more for this film particularly. But I wonder if part of it is, if it is specific to this film, if it's to kind of give you the point of view if you were like a person just observing these events. Like there's one point near the end of the film where something happens in like the son's house. There's something that happens and then they get excited and they go to back of their room and, jump on their beds or something. They do something, we don't see it. And we just stay in the hallway, which almost it seems like if you were an adult just observing that, you don't get to, you're going to stay in the hallway while you hear other stuff going on. Or if you're watching them go off to school, you're just watching them go up the hill. You're not like, getting close-ups and all that stuff. So I wonder if that was kind of part of the thing. It's putting you kind of in the action as if you were one of the residents of this neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that may be the case. And I also felt like having things centered made it feel almost like a TV that you're watching, if that makes sense. Like almost a little bit of a meta thing going on with the way that it's being framed.
No, yeah, that very well could be. That's kind of, I wonder if that is the case. That is kind of a good observation.
Other bits of tomfoolery may seem more arbitrary. A patch of red in the corner of a shot can be echoed by a similar patch in the next shot, but it doesn't have to be. Serious filmmakers aren't supposed to muck about like this, which may be why Ozu's comedies were ignored for so long, and why critics expended so much energy coming up with sensible reasons for Ozu's idiosyncratic stylistic choices. So he filmed from a low angle because that's the height of a person sitting on a tatami mat. But maybe he just liked the way things looked from down there.
Okay, so our next film is going to be a 1969 British film called Kes. It's by English director Ken Loach. It was his second theatrical feature, and it was based on a 1968 book by English author Barry Hines called Kestrel for a Knave. Hines co-wrote the script with Loach and the film's producer Tony Garnett. The story follows a young 15-year-old Yorkshire boy named Billy, played by David Bradley, but not the same David Bradley you're probably thinking of when I say that name. It's not the one from Harry Potter and Doctor Who and Edgar Wright films and The Strain and many other films. It's somebody else who also has the same name who's been confused with him, I think, many times. Anyway, Billy lives in a mining area of Yorkshire, and Billy's dad is out of the picture for reasons that we're not told. His mother, who's played by Lynn Perry, is rather working, or she's out at reasonable hours with friends at night. Billy's half-brother, Judd, played by Freddie Fletcher. He works at the mine, and he's also abusive physically and verbally to Billy. Billy has no real strong friendships with kids his age. He has no interest in his strict school. He often daydreams or barely even listens to his teachers. He lies a lot, and he's really just not interested in it. And most of his teachers don't really hold him in that high of regard either. Billy, he works, I think, kind of like a paper route type thing. And he's going to be starting a new job soon. Doesn't know what that is yet. He has to talk to somebody about what that job is going to be. He doesn't really care about the work either. But as he says, at least he'll get paid for that. Well, he's not getting paid to be disinterested at school. And the only real thing we see him get any sort of enjoyment or interest in is training a kestrel, which is a falcon that he names Kes. He got the falcon from a nest, and now he's training him throughout the film. It's a hobby that people around him rather don't get, or they just mock. So what I found interesting about the movie... Well, before I say that, I know you are aware of this because you responded to my tweet about it. I've acclimated pretty well to British accents over the years, but I found the people in the movie are from Yorkshire. They have genuine accents. The extras in the film are from the area and stuff, so they're all speaking in the genuine way with the dialects and all that stuff. Did you find it difficult to understand what people were saying in the movie?
Yes, I found it extremely difficult to understand them, and I was trying to turn on subtitles. I have the Blu-ray, and honestly, I don't think there are subtitles on this Blu-ray, so that made it pretty
No,
tough.
there are. Because I have the
Okay,
Blu-ray
well, I
too.
couldn't find a way to turn them on, so I guess that's my failing. But yeah, I kind of struggled with trying to understand, so I kind of was more going with the atmosphere than the exact things they were being said. So it was kind of like watching a film in another language, which
Yeah.
made things interesting. But I feel like I still caught the emotional arc of the film.
Jude,
What?
don't be late.
Shut it.
Clock's not fast.
I said shut it.
Yeah, that is.
Well, shut it then.
I tell me mum on D.
Shut it, skinky hell.
People who are watching it, unless maybe if you're from that area, I would definitely put subtitles on. Even with the subtitles, it was sometimes a little difficult. But something I did like about the film is this portrayal of a boy who doesn't really have any interests or doesn't really know what he's interested in, doesn't know what his path is in life at all, doesn't really have a support system at home, really. He has his mother is loving, but she's not always necessarily the most supportive, or at least she's not terribly present to support him. And he doesn't have a support system at school. I think he's too shy and too just kind of vulnerable and worried about his interests that he doesn't want to tell people about them usually. And when he does finally find something of interest and people find out about it, it's often, like I said, ridiculed and people don't get it. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to show in a film.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I loved this movie, but also it depressed the hell out of me. So I will say that up front. Like maybe hold off until things are better in the world to watch this because it made me feel really sad. That being said, first of all, he does give a beautiful performance, David Bradley, and if you watch the special features, there's interviews with David Bradley as well as with Ken Loach and with the cinematographer Chris Menges. So, the good news is the real guy made it out of Yorkshire, made it out of the mines, and, has gone on to act in other things. I think he's done some acting on the British stage in particular. But the story itself about, a young boy who basically society has already given up on, even though he's only a teenager, was very compelling. And I loved the scenes between him and the Kestrel. I thought they were absolutely gorgeous. The adults in his life have pretty much totally failed him. Some of them are outright a-holes, and others just have ignored him or don't take him seriously. The PE teacher in particular, I just wanted to punch in the face like 30 times in a row. He was so evil.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he at one point makes him stay in the shower, and then because he didn't play football, that's English football, soccer for you American people, because he didn't play that as well as he would want in the PE class, he basically forces him to not only stay in the shower and clean up, but also he turns, I think he turns it really cold or really hot, I forget which, and basically forces...
I think cold.
Yeah, cold, and forces him to stay in there. He has to climb out of it because he's worried about getting sick and stuff, and the other boys are too.
The other two boys that he tells them to, like, not let him out of the shower, even they are like, what if he catches pneumonia? And the guy's like,
I don't care what he gets. If he thinks I'm running my blood to water for 90 minutes, for him to deliberately throw the game away, he's got other things coming.
I was just like, this guy is horrible. Ironically, the guy who wrote the book that it's based on, Barry Hines, actually was a PE teacher, but my guess is he was a bit nicer. At least I would hope so.
Yeah, I would hope. I have that point of view
I
on
liked the English teacher. I believe Colin Welland is his name. He played Mr. Farthing, and I know he actually has done some other things too. He actually wrote the script for Chariots of Fire, another film that I believe is out on the Criterion collection, and won an Oscar for that. But he plays the English teacher, really the only adult in Billy's life that does take an interest in him after he tells him, about his Kestrel, and he actually goes out and watches him train him for a while. So, that's probably the only redemptive character that you could say of the adults in this movie.
Notice how quietly we're speaking. If we're frightened to raise our voices. Be like shouting in church.
It's because they're nervous, sir.
Oh, no, it's more than that. It's instinctive. It's a sort of respect.
No, sir, that's what makes me mad. No, when I take her for walks, somebody comes up to me saying, look, it's Billy Casper, he's a pet hawk. I could shout at him, sir, it ain't a pet. Oh, if somebody comes up to me and says, is it tame? Is it tame? Hawks, I can't be tamed. They're manned. It's wild and it's fierce and it's not bothered about anybody. Not bothered about me, right? That's what makes it great.
The mom is sort of neutral, like she's trying, but not very well, and everybody else has sort of given up on him.
Yeah, and the mom doesn't. Like, at one point, the half-brother Judd does something mean to Billy, and the mother is like, "Why would you do that? That's, mean. That's upset him a lot. Blah blah blah." But at the same time, she doesn't really understand and isn't, again, as supportive, and she's still kind of like, to Billy, still kind of just like, well, kind of just get over it. It's not that big of a deal. So
exactly, you can kind of tell that she's probably had her share of bad lumps in life, so she's just kind of like, well, get used to it, kid.
So yeah, it's like she does care about her son. It's just she doesn't. I think partially she's just kind of fed up because she's just tired, and she actually said she wants somebody to help her be a parent, and she doesn't have that for again reasons we don't know. But did you think that Billy and the Kestrel, Kes, had enough screen time together? Because it seemed like for a movie called Kes, that the bird doesn't actually feature in the movie a whole lot, and I just felt that was kind of an underdeveloped relationship in the film to me.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more. Maybe it's because I've watched How to Train Your Dragon too many times, and I was expecting something more along those lines, where that's like the main point of the movie.
Yeah.
My guess, because they use a real kestrel, is that maybe they just couldn't get the birds to cooperate on screen for as long as we might have wanted to see them. Again, watching that special feature on the making of the movie, Barry, who wrote the book, along with his brother and David Bradley, they all trained the kestrels together. They had 3 kestrels that they sort of substituted in and out in the different scenes, and apparently one of them was very uncooperative and the other 2 were better, but they actually did have to go through that whole long process of training them. So a lot of the filming was really just authentically them training kestrels, which is interesting. But that was my only guess, is that they just didn't have enough time where the birds cooperated, because again, they're not like actors, they're actually so.
Yeah, they were working with small children and animals, which is kind of a no-no. Well, you asked me about it in the last one. So how do you think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of child actors in this movie. What did you think of the child actors, especially when you couldn't understand much of what they were saying?
I couldn't understand all of what they said, but I will say that they felt authentic, just in the sense that there's clearly camaraderie between a lot of them, even if it's them ganging up on Billy. Their faces were very authentic, which that's not really something they can control, but like right down to, some of them have bad teeth or funky hair, or, their clothes don't fit quite right. I just felt like when I was looking at, like, say, a classroom full of boys, they looked like probably what a classroom full of boys from Yorkshire looked like, and that's because they cast people from that area that hadn't acted before. And as they were filming, from what they were saying in the commentary, they would stop and say, okay, this is what's going to happen in this scene, but you guys are the experts. Tell us if you would say this differently or if you would do something different here. It was very collaborative. So in a way, these kids were sort of playing themselves, even though they're also pushing the plot forward. So I think that's why it was so successful in that way. And I definitely think David Bradley was just phenomenal as Billy, because he doesn't have that much to say, but he has to convey a lot with his face and with his eyes. And with the wrong kid in that part, it might be hard to empathize with him, but really he's a very sympathetic figure, even though, like you said earlier, he's not a perfect kid. He steals, he lies, he's bad at school, he doesn't seem to care about too much besides the kestrel, but we do care about him because we start to see things from his point of view.
Yeah, he doesn't emote a lot. I mean, when he gets upset and stuff, he'll do more. But when he doesn't emote facially, but it still works. And I think maybe he's kind of more, in a way, kind of reserved. I mean, he's still a kid. He's still emotional, but he's still kind of reserved in a way. And I think he's just kind of. It kind of works because it kind of shows that the kid's kind of emotionally detached from a lot of the stuff that's happening around him, so he doesn't always react like maybe a lot of kids would. He's just kind of going through it all.
Yeah, and he somehow conveys an innocence, even though we know that he's, like I said, not always up to the best things. He just seems like a real innocent kid. And, sometimes, especially in some of those scenes in the locker room where he's standing there just shivering and you see that, his ribs are sticking out and he's putting his arms up around himself to try to stay warm. He looks so helpless. And I think, again, that's something that maybe came natural, but also something that he's not putting on any sort of airs here. He's just, playing it very naturally.
Yeah, and like you said, he is the David Bradley. He came from that area, and he very much didn't like the Billy in the movie doesn't want to follow his half brother's footsteps and go into the mine. He's very adamant when he talks to a guy about what job he's going to get. He doesn't really help the guy at all in terms of what his interests are, in terms of what he wants to do. But he's very adamant that he doesn't want to be in the mine, and the actor himself really didn't want to work in the mine either. So it was kind of, I think, a great casting in that regard, because they're coming from a similar maybe point of view of maybe not knowing what they want to do, but they know what they don't want to do. And
right.
I think that he helps channel that in that part.
Yeah, for sure. That conversation he has with the employment officer, who presumably is it seemed like actually at the school, unless I misinterpreted that scene, that kids that want to leave school at that age, they have to go see this employment officer and figure out what their occupation is going to be. And, that conversation really revealed a lot, I think, just in terms of what the people in that working class during that time in England were going through. And that was, 1969. So I think a large generation of people really had to go through some of those conversations of, okay, I'm not going to continue in school. I'm going to either go to the mines or get an office job or do some sort of manual labor. They didn't have a ton of options. And so we see that from Billy's point of view, and I think it really brings that point home.
Yeah, because I remember, hearing people from that generation from, kind of the UK area talking about kind of, in the 60s, you really can't say, oh, I want to do something in the arts. People weren't really going to take that seriously and stuff. So yeah, your options, his options are very limited. And he could tell the employment guy, oh, I'm interested in birds and, I have this falcon that I'm training and blah, blah. But, that's probably not something that's going to be received terribly well, because it says it's not probably that viable of a job and one that a lot of people have, so it's not going to be taken seriously. So again, I think the kid's almost just afraid to even mention what his interests are, because they're just not stuff that people do when they get older, so he doesn't want to talk to adults about it.
Yeah, it almost seems like he's reticent to share his hobby about the Kestrel training with anybody at first, because it's kind of his own private thing that he has. It's the one thing that nobody can touch yet. Nobody can crush that dream yet. And then when he does open up and share about it to the class, they do seem interested. But I think you're totally right that, it's not something that he can make money in. So he knows at some point it's something that he's not going to be able to do anymore.
Yeah, it's probably a representation of the last bit of childhood that he has before he has to kind of go off and lose his childhood, really. I think that's I think Ken Loach or somebody said it's basically what the film is about, is basically a lost childhood, because he doesn't really have one. He doesn't really play, he doesn't really enjoy it, he's not really carefree. He can't really look kind of to the horizons and see all these possibilities of things he can do, and it's just kind of miserable and dreary and kind of horrible. And his one escape is training this bird.
I think Ken Loach has gone on to make a number of other movies about working class people, various time periods, and that seems to be a thing that he cares quite a bit about, and I think it was very well portrayed in this movie. It's hard to watch this and not think about parallels to other people in society even now that don't have that many options and that are forced to make those difficult choices because there's not necessarily a societal safety net there for them. But I hope things have gotten a little bit better.
Yeah, and there's not a support system, I think, for a lot of it. Or there's not just that there's not somebody there to say, oh, keep trying, you can do this. If you want to be, let's say, an obvious thing like an actor, oh, you can keep doing this, keep trying, maybe do this or do that, whatever. There's not even somebody to introduce that idea to them that you can be, let's say, an actor or whatever. There's just not, there's nobody there to let you know that that's a possibility. I mean, there's so many people of certain generations that maybe grew up to be, let's say, in entertainment, but that was just almost just like they didn't know that they could do that when they were growing up. That just wasn't a thing they do because they were in a small town, that they were in a different part of the world where that wasn't an option or whatever. So that's, I think, part of the kids' problem, and certain working class people then and now, they just don't know of the option. They aren't kind of raised to think of other possibilities. So even if they're miserable in their life or miserable in their job or whatever, they don't even think about the fact that, oh, I can go do something else. They might even think, oh, this is my only option. They just go and do it because they think that's what they have to do and there's nothing else they can do, and they don't even think about it.
Yeah, I was thinking about other filmmakers that are either influenced by this film or have made, similarly gripping portraits of a working class childhood or coming of age. And I was thinking about Andrea Arnold and Fish Tank. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's another Criterion collection film centering on a teenage girl who's really trying to be a dancer. Like, that's her dream. But of course, her family lives in, more poverty, and her mom is barely scraping by and things like that. And I know that's another one where they cast basically non-actors just based on who was around and from that area. And I thought that was an interesting parallel. I don't know, again, if she was a Ken Loach fan or if it just happened to be that way, but I think that idea of casting non-professional actors, especially when you're telling a story about people who are from a specific area, or another great example would be like the Florida Project, right? Casting people that are perhaps from that class that can directly relate to that experience versus, a rich, well-liked actor that now has to study what those people are really like and try to channel that somehow. You get much more authenticity by somebody who's lived it. So the final film that we'll be talking about is The Spirit of the Beehive, which is a 1973 film from director Víctor Erice. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was also from a screenplay that he wrote along with Ángel Fernández Santos, Francisco Quirejeta, and the story was also by Santos. So this story centers on two sisters. One is 6-year-old Anna, and the other one is Isabel, who's a couple years older. And they live in a small village in Spain in the year 1940. So even though the movie takes place in the 70s, or is shot in the 70s, the story takes place in the 40s, and it's during the time of Franco. So the Civil War has just ended at this time. And it's just a very bad time for the country. It's a time when the country was really under a lot of upheaval. And even though we don't see the direct impact of that on the children or on the story, I think that sense of foreboding sort of seeps into the movie, much in the same way that we saw that with Pan's Labyrinth, which I believe this movie is a direct influence on.
Spirit of the Beehive by Víctor Erice is a movie that transformed my life. Whatever I do in life, two shadows are cast upon my own. One is James Whale's Frankenstein, and the other one is Víctor Erice's Spirit of the Beehive, and they are both one and the same.
So the story starts with a mobile cinema coming into town and bringing the movie Frankenstein. And since there's no actual movie theater in the town, everybody just goes to City Hall and the movie plays and everybody gets very excited. Hall is packed. The kids love it. And Anna in particular is very intrigued by Frankenstein and the monster and the scene with the little girl. So this kind of carries on. The girls talk about spirits and they sort of go out on the lookout for their own version of Frankenstein, and very interesting things result from that. And the whole movie, even though it's set in reality, has sort of a magical realism feel to it. So I love this one. This was my favorite of the three. What did you think?
Okay, I want to stress, I did not hate the film. I don't want to get people to get that impression. I personally, and this is not a knock on the filmmakers at all, which I'll explain in a second, I just didn't get it, to be honest. I was reading stuff after I watched the film, kind of the symbolism and metaphors, because keep in mind, for people who don't know, even though the Civil War had ended long before 1973 when this came out, they were still, and things I think I read were lighter at this point in terms of the government control and overseeing of day-to-day lives and all that stuff. So it was a little bit better at this point by 1973. People still had to be careful about anti-Franco messages in films and stuff. So they had to in order for filmmakers to get by with that stuff, they had to be really subtle and use a lot of metaphors to kind of say bad things about the government without the government noticing that they were saying bad things about them. So there's a lot of that in this film, which reading about some of the symbolisms and stuff like that, and some of the stuff they do with cinematography and all that, I understand more of what they were going for, but it was personally, for me, I was not as affected by it just because honestly, it's a problem with me. I'm a bit slow on the pickup with certain stuff, so I didn't maybe get it as much as other people.
No, I can totally understand that. I can't say that I can sit down and tell you what each shot of the movie means by any stretch of the imagination, but I loved, the movie's called The Spirit of the Beehive. I love the spirit of the movie. I thought that it felt really imaginative. I loved the fantasy world that the little girls sort of live in, and they're bringing their love of this movie into their everyday life as they're, going to school. And they also sort of play with themes of mortality. The girls do, and the movie does. There's certainly moments of suspense that I was very concerned about what was going to happen to these kids. And you see in their little eyes just like the most wide-eyed wonder. And unlike Billy in the last movie, they haven't had that wonder taken away yet. They're still very open to things that we can't see as adults and things that we perhaps have decided don't exist anymore as adults. But as kids, they're very open to it. So, they talk about how you can call to Frankenstein, and if he knows you, then you can talk to him, and you can talk to him in the dark, or you can close your eyes. And so they have this whole sort of dream world that they're inhabiting that overlays just everyday objects and everyday scenes, whether that's running around outside or watching trains go by or looking in a well to see if there's something hiding in it, seeing footprints and thinking that they belong to a non-human entity or something more mystical. I just loved that whole aura that overlaid the film. And I think the way that it's shot and the color in particular, because it's all very honey colored and beautiful, rich palettes, I loved that as well.
No, there's this, I wouldn't say there's like a fairy tale aspect to it, but it's almost like a fable feel in terms of like the fable of the little girl that met the Frankenstein monster or whatever. That kind of thing to it, that I think, that kind of feel to it that kind of runs throughout the whole thing. It's just the feeling that I got throughout. It was a very specific type of mood and kind of semi-fantasy feel that I like seeing in movies. I don't see them as often as I would like. And I thought that was one thing I liked a lot about the film. And also, I mean, in terms of the little girls, the main one, Anna, she is, I think, on her way because, I mean, they intentionally make the cinematography very stark. There's a lot of open areas. There's just not a lot in this very small Spanish town. And, again, you don't really see many direct references to the war, but I think it's starting to, I almost wonder if they're in that fantasy world just to, because that's one of the few things they can do, and it's one of their escapes from their lives and what's going on around them, even if they don't fully understand all the stuff that's going on around them, which they probably don't since they're really young kids. But I think Anna is on her way to becoming kind of, in a way, kind of like I was describing with Billy and Kes. She's maybe on her way to becoming a bit emotionally detached and maybe be clinging too much to this fantasy world that she is creating herself. And I don't know, I think it almost maybe shows a kid's ability to escape during kind of difficult times and stuff, but also the toll that those times can have on a kid emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, and I actually felt that out of the three movies, this was the one where the adults and the children seem to have the most in common. And what I mean by that is each of the adults in this movie also have some sort of escapist hobby or way of not really dealing with the reality that they're in. So their father is this older man who I kept thinking looked just like Craig T. Nelson, and my boyfriend insists he looks like David Thewlis, so somebody's wrong. But anyway, he is a beekeeper, which is where the Beehive thing comes in. And, he has these sort of poetic things that he says and does when he's talking to his bees and watching the bees and harvesting the honey, and has this whole getup. And then we see him later in his study and he falls asleep reading a book. So he has this very active inner life, but he doesn't necessarily get to exercise it all that much. He's still dealing with the practicalities. And then his wife, the girl's mother, also seems to be caught up in daydream quite frequently. We see her writing letters to a lover that she had to leave behind, and we also see her, playing the piano. She doesn't seem to engage all that much with her kids or with her husband. They don't really talk that much. So again, it's almost like each of these people is living in their own world, sort of separate from the real world, and nobody's really facing up to the realities.
Yeah, and I know that they wanted to. One of the metaphors was showing how families were kind of disintegrating during the Franco rule, and like somebody pointed, there was a bit of trivia that the family, all 4 members of the family, are never shown in the same shot together. There always this kind of separation with them.
A breakfast scene late in the film is the only time the 4 family members are together in one space, yet none of them speaks at all. The paucity of dialogue emphasizes that the parents seem unable to discuss the horror and desolation of the fascist victory in the war and life thereafter. They are even less able to explain it to their children or to fathom its effects on the 2 girls. The chasm between the ways in which adults and children perceive things is constantly clear.
But also, I mean, they all have their hobbies, if you want to call them that, and things that they do, beekeeping, a woman writing, this mother writing letters, and the kids playing and doing this stuff. But except for maybe the older daughter, the other 3 don't seem to have, and nobody else in the town that we really see, for the most part, really seem to have, they have hobbies and stuff. They have, like the beekeeping thing, or, seems like something that the father used to be very passionate about, but is now kind of just going through the motions with. It seems like he wants to, maybe even talking or writing the poetry or whatever he's doing is almost a way to kind of rekindle that, but it seems to be almost, going through the motions and not being able to rekindle that thing that he used to be very passionate about, and it's just kind of there for him now. It seems like that's what a lot of people are in the movie are kind of experiencing, is this kind of this there feeling, and even the things, their escapes, aren't always giving them the emotions and feelings and positivity and whatever that they actually want them to do anymore.
Yeah, it seems like fewer things are bringing them the same joy or the same level of passion that they had in the past. But the girls seem to be mining passion and interest in different things and experimenting a lot, especially Isabel. I think she's an interesting character because she's probably, I'm going to guess if Anna is 6, I'm guessing that Isabel's probably supposed to be maybe about 10. So a little bit older, a little bit more precocious. And she's constantly sort of messing with her sister and, trying to make her gullible and believe different things. And she plays pranks on her and things like that. So
yeah, and she's a bit, maybe I was misinterpreting some of the scenes, but she seems, like at one point, what was this? What animal was that?
When she looks like she's either holding the cat or possibly trying to strangle the cat.
Yeah, and I was like, what the F are you doing? And then
I was by that as well.
And she has like blood, I think, after that, because the cat scratches or bites her or something, and then she puts it on her lips, and it's kind of like after that scene, you just have like, I think, an unsettling kind of, at least I did, I was unsettled by her character throughout the rest of it. I didn't really trust her fully after that.
Yeah, so again, I think she's playing with that dangerous line where she's not grown up yet, but she's still trying to play like a grown up, and I'm sure she's seen at least hints of violence. So I sort of interpreted it as that way, that she's experimenting with sort of adult things that she's maybe misinterpreted or only seen parts of. But I was very thankful the cat made it out. I was concerned. I'm not going to lie. Anytime something bad happens to a cat, or even if a cat or dog appears in a movie, I always get like that sense of foreboding that something bad will happen. So the cat is fine, but the cat definitely got its little revenge by drawing some blood, and I was proud of it for that. There are other things that happen in the story, and there was one recurring thing I loved, which was this pocket watch. I've never seen anything like this, but it's a pocket watch that is almost like a music box at the same time. So when you open it, it plays a song. Mm-hmm. I loved that. It's my favorite use of a watch in a movie since Pulp Fiction. So definitely see this. This doesn't quite have that much of a journey. But I really liked the music that it played, and I liked that watch kind of carrying through. You see it change hands a couple times, and it becomes kind of an important object that signifies something greater.
Mentioning the clockwork, you mentioned Pan's Labyrinth at the beginning. I do know, at least from what I was reading, that this was I think one of the most popular, especially at that time, Spanish films ever made. So I'm sure Guillermo del Toro, who directed and wrote Pan's Labyrinth, I'm sure, he's Mexican, not Spanish, but I'm sure he would, and being the cinephile that he is, that he would have seen this. The feeling of the film to a certain degree, and if you've seen a del Toro film, or many of them, he's very into clockwork stiff. And he's done a couple films about set during the Spanish Civil War, Devil's Backbone, and then Pan's Labyrinth. So I'm sure that was an inspiration. It was an inspiration to him, and it is kind of interesting to see some of those inspirations and kind of where they came from, and maybe different points of view on similar preferences and ideals, like use of clockwork, using your set to help sell part of your message, like those windows, those Beehive windows. So I don't know, I found that interesting.
Yeah, the setting is really beautiful, some of those buildings, and like you mentioned, those windows. So I watched one of the featurettes that's on the Criterion channel and presumably on the DVD that I am currently looking at, but I didn't watch everything on the DVD yet. I just was watching things on the channel. There's a great making of featurette, and one thing I learned was that originally this was going to be a black and white film, and then they sort of retooled it and decided to do color, which obviously the color becomes very crucial to the way that the story is unfolding, because it is that sort of honeybee, honeycomb kind of motif that recurs throughout. And those stained glass windows, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they said were made by the father of the cinematographer, who kind of designed them to help with creating that Beehive feeling on the set. So definitely very interesting.
We can talk about the visual coding of the movie, which is coded in this beautiful honey color, like a beehive. The beehive pattern on the windows, but the fact is that it's more about the fields, it's about the country, it's about the war, even if it's so far away. This is a tiny little community in Segovia, and nothing is happening, and yet one little tiny fragment of war comes into their lives, and with it, it brings the entire war.
That would have been interesting in black and white thing. I'm trying to picture how that would look. I think in some cases it would be good, and it would help kind of do the parallels with the Frankenstein story, which I do like. There's one point near the end of the film where they're looking for Anna, and there's a lot of shots of men with not actual torches or something, but like flashlights and dogs and stuff going through the forest, and that seemed like nice subtle reference imagery to Frankenstein, that movie. And I don't know, I like the use of Frankenstein in the movie to do something like this. It's nice for, I think, cinephiles to see references like that and to kind of use a movie in that way. But it's also just a bit different. It's instead of other movies using literature or books or an old, like I said, old fable or whatever, they're using kind of a movie to do similar things. So instead of saying I don't know, using like Hansel and Gretel or something, and then she sees a witch or something around, she sees a movie and she's possibly seeing one of the characters from that. I thought that was kind of a different point of view, which I haven't seen before in a movie.
Yeah, I liked that too, and I liked kind of the parallel between this and Good Morning, because it's, again, towns where TV or movies are not yet widespread, and so there's more of that cinematic wonder from the children in particular, and not knowing what parts are real and what parts are fake. So, the two girls after the movie are kind of talking to each other about, why did Frankenstein kill the girl? Why did they kill the monster? And they're having this deep conversation about it. And again, that blurring of truth and fiction is so creative. And the director on the commentary was saying he originally wanted to make this more of a genre film, but because of budget constraints, he wasn't able to. So he just made it more of a simple story with the girls being obsessed with Frankenstein, and that was his own version of, a tribute to the genre movies of the 30s and 40s. So, he did a great retelling and a restaging of the fable, and I think brought some really cool things to life with it.
Yeah, it'd be like in Pan's Labyrinth if they had the same story and the same kind of feel, but you only saw the supernatural stuff once.
Right.
It's just, it's kind of an interesting way to go about it, but at the same time, I think it puts you kind of in the headspace of the kids, but also not in the headspace of the kids. You're kind of in both worlds. You can see it from the kids' point of view, but you're also seeing it from the adults' point of view, because you're not seeing all the stuff that they're seeing. You're getting the outside perspective and the inside perspective, so which in a way might, I think, maybe lend itself to both adults and not kids, because it's not really a kids' film, but to younger people who are closer to that age. It's delivering itself to both points of view, which I think is good.
Yeah, and I think out of the three movies, this is the one that brought me back to my own childhood the most, just because it reminded me of how something really small, like one really small image or seemingly insignificant experience, can really shape the way that you see the world going forward. And I think there's several pivotal moments like that for the girls, and particularly for Anna, where it's something that maybe the adults wouldn't even think twice about, but for a kid, it becomes like the defining moment in her life up to that point.
The reason why the connection exists between James Whale's Frankenstein and Spirit of the Beehive is very personal to me, because the movie that James Whale did in Hollywood with Boris Karloff, produced by Universal, travels all over the world and arrives to a tiny, little, dusty city in Spain and is seen by the eyes of a 6-year-old girl. And it transforms her. And it makes the world magical. And that depth of connection, that essential connection, which I think resumes the reason why I make movies, not only is there, but I am that girl. Frankenstein came to my life at that age, when I was a kid, and it transformed me in the same way. It's one of my top 3 films of all times, and it represents the most sacred spirit of film for me.
Which of these movies, and they're all very different, obviously, one's more of a comedy sort of drama, one's kind of the stark look at working class families in the UK, and another one's kind of this period drama, sort of supernatural drama about childhood and fantasy and escape and all that. But despite them being very different films, do you think one of them captures childhood particularly well? It sounds like you would think Beehive.
Yeah, I think Beehive for me, and maybe that's partially because it also focused on 2 girls, but I think just because of the way it played between imagination and kids kind of running free, to me it rang the most true. But I think it's very subjective. It depends on your particular experience, because each of these films captures a very different childhood experience.
For me, oh God, I came up with this question. I don't actually have an answer in mind. Yeah, I think it does. I probably would agree with you. It does depend on your point of view. And I'm going to actually have to do a cop-out with my own question, because I think they all do great of capturing what they're trying to capture, I think. I would probably the most fond of Good Morning, just because of its subject matter. I think it's just interesting and different, and this kind of microcosm of Japanese life, family life at that time, and just capturing stuff again other families and other kids in other countries would have felt too. So yeah, I don't really have an answer to that. That's kind of a lame thing that I brought up, but yeah.
No, not lame at all. I like thinking about that kind of stuff, and we both chose these movies somewhat blindly. We hadn't seen any of them yet ourselves when we picked them. And so I'm glad that we lucked into really good films. I don't think there's a bad one in the bunch, which of course they're Criterion, so that shouldn't be too surprising. I ranked 2 of them 5 stars, which is like the highest rating I would give, and Kez I gave 4 just because, like I said, it was depressing me, and sometimes that impacts my enjoyment of a movie, but still a gorgeously made movie. Which of the 3, I guess, directors would you want to pursue more of their work after seeing these movies?
Probably Ozu first. I mean, again, I bought, beyond Good Morning, I bought 1 or 2 collections of his stuff from Criterion anyway, just because his point of view and the way they were describing the stuff he likes to write and make films about just sounded very interesting to me. So I would like to explore more of that. After that, probably Víctor Erice. Probably him, just because, again, I like the point of the feeling of Beehive. I just really like. So I would like to see if that's captured in other films that maybe would hit me more if I can kind of get on their wavelength. And then probably Last Loach. I will probably watch more of his films at some point. That one, even though I do like Kest, I don't know, just didn't interest me as much as the other points of view, I suppose.
My order would be the same as yours, because Ozu, I felt guilty about not seeing more of his films for a long time. I tried to watch Tokyo Story a long time ago, and I fell asleep, and I haven't returned to it, so I still feel like probably somebody's going to come along and steal my cinephile card here any second now because of that. So this was my second chance with Ozu, and I'm now going to pursue more of his films as a result. I loved Good Morning, and if there are other movies in his collection that are similar, I loved his sense of humor. I loved his visual style, so I'm interested to pursue more of that. And then Víctor Erice, Beehive is such a perfect movie that I have a hard time believing he could come up with another one that's equally perfect. But if so, then I'm all ears and I'm all eyes. So I can't wait to dive more into that. Ken Loach, I have not seen his other movies, but I'm curious about them. And even if they're, tough subject matter at times, I think it's important to have that lens on the world, but I might save it for when things in the real world are a little bit more positive, so that I don't get even more depressed by them. What movies do you feel like has the most influence on modern filmmakers, if you had to pick one?
God. Well, partially depends on what filmmaker and where you're talking about, I think. But maybe Kes, just because of how it's shot and the way it deals with its characters. Because I would almost said Ozu, but I think people approach relationships and familiar or otherwise a bit different than it does. And I think, except for certain filmmakers, I think Spirit of the Beehive is not really a style that you're going to see a lot of. But yeah, I would really say Loach is, for me, from what films I've seen, probably the most common kind of echo I've seen in future stuff.
Yeah, I think I would go with Loach as well, because I think when you think of indie, in quotes, movies, especially working class movies, I think that Kes does kind of set a template of, very naturalistic, casting, unknown people to play the parts and telling perhaps sad stories, but stories that need to be told. I can think of a lot of filmmakers that, whether they intend to or not, remind me of the style that I saw in Kes. So yeah, I would tend to agree, but I'd love to see more filmmakers watch Beehive or watch Good Morning and pull some inspiration from those sources too, because Good Morning is so playful and Beehive is so imaginative and beautiful that I would love to see more of those seep into the culture.
No, definitely. Especially, I think, Beehive to a certain degree. And again, Good Morning, saying a lot through a very simple, very, very small scale story is something I would like to see.
Well, the name of this podcast is Criterion Collector. So as a Criterion Collector, Tim, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty jazzed about some of the titles that they have coming up for physical release, either re-releases of something that's been out of print or things that are just announced. So tell me what you're looking forward to the most of their upcoming releases.
Probably the thing I'm looking forward to the most, in terms of just being excited about it, is on May 26th, they're releasing a collection of Scorsese shorts, which I'm very excited about. I have seen none of any short films or short subject stuff that he has done, so I'm looking forward very much to that. And in terms of just interest, but not necessarily as much excitement, Buster Keaton's The Cameraman is obviously interesting. Portrait of a Lady on Fire, those both coming out in mid to late June. And then something I've heard a lot of great stuff about lately on Twitter is for what looks to be a very, 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 very depressing war film, Come and See, which I've heard wonderful things about.
Yeah, that one's been on my watch list for a long time, so I am looking forward to diving into it, even though I know it's going to be a bit of a haul. The one I'm most excited about is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. You guys heard us talk about Celine Sciamma's earlier movie, Tomboy, on this very podcast, and if you missed this in theaters, it had a fairly short theatrical window, unfortunately cut even shorter by coronavirus, but if you have a chance to pick this one up, I'm super excited it's getting a Criterion release because it is a beautiful film. And I'm also super excited that Grand Budapest Hotel is finally going to be out on Criterion, so I can rebuy that one. And then in terms of movies I have not seen, I am also excited about the Scorsese shorts. I think that's going to be great. But Husbands from Cassavetes is one that I've been looking for a while, and I'm very excited to take a look at that one.
And for people who are kind of like more popular classic films, if you want to use the word classic for this era of filming, they are also going to be doing The Great Escape in middle of May. And for people who have seen very little to no movies with Lucille Ball, they are doing Dance Girl Dance, which is also mid-May. So keep an eye out for those. I'm looking forward to buying multiple of those titles when I actually have money to buy them.
I like that we see quite a number of female filmmakers, female directors in this next upcoming launch of titles, because you've got Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is Celine Sciamma. Dorothy Arzner is the director of Dance Girl Dance. Then you also have Me and You and Everyone We Know by Miranda July. So some really great selections. And Prince of Tides, Barbra Streisand, is coming out very soon on March 31st. So maybe even by the time this podcast is out. So definitely some great female filmmakers to check out.
Okay, so we've talked about some titles that are coming up. What is one or multiple Criterion buys that you've done lately, or maybe a Criterion film that you've watched, besides the ones we've already talked about, that you would want to share or highlight or just, share your excitement about?
Yeah, so it's been a minute since I've bought a Criterion film, but the last purchase that I made was the Nikatsu Noir collection, which is an Eclipse series number 17. And this is all Japanese noir films. So you have I Am Waiting, Rusty Knife, Take Aim at the Police Van, Cruel Gun Story, and A Colt Is My Passport. And these are all available on the Criterion channel, last I checked. So if you don't have the money for the physical collection right now, you can wait for a sale. But in the meantime, check out some of these on the channel. I haven't watched all of them, but I have seen Colt Is My Passport, and that one is phenomenal. And these are super enjoyable movies that if you have a penchant for film noir, or if you're just looking to get into some of the 60s era Japanese films, these are some really awesome crime films that you can check out. And I've been very pleasantly surprised by them so far.
Yeah, and some of mine, I haven't made any in a while either. I think it was sometime in November, which was the last time they did a month-long 50% off sale. And some of the ones I got mostly, I got the subject matter for last month, Lubitsch musicals. But I also got a lot of Japanese films, or collections, I should say. Some silent films that Ozu directed, Tokyo Chorus, I Was Born But, Passing Fancy, and then some other, that was an Eclipse series, and then some other Eclipse series as well. Travels with, beg your pardon if I mispronounce this, Roshu Shimizu, and then Silent Naruse. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing that. I apologize. And then other two things I would maybe highlight are the Coker trilogy, and then in terms of more, I guess, mainstream, air quotes, there is The King of Jazz, which I am very excited to pop in. It's also, I talked about last time how I'm interested in early musicals. This was also an early musical, and I am looking forward to having the time to actually sit down and watch that.
That should be really cool. It sounds like you've got plenty to keep you occupied while you are housebound for the next however long that might be.
Oh yes, I buy so many Criterion stuff that I haven't actually seen, and which is kind of a risky thing to do. I wouldn't recommend it all of the time, and I need to utilize the Criterion channel more for stuff like that. But yes, there's still a lot of stuff I have to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing.
And speaking of stuff to watch, I don't know if you've checked the most recent lineup on the Criterion channel, but I'm looking at it right now, and there's a lot of cool stuff that's been recently added. One that I was excited to see was Art School Confidential, Terry Zwigoff film from 2006. I think it's super underrated. It's a really fun spoof on the art world while also taking almost like a film noir whodunit kind of feel to it. So that one is super worth watching. Also, His Girl Friday, which you cannot go wrong with, Howard Hawks film. And Maren Adi is a filmmaker you may have heard of before. She is highlighted on the channel right now as well. So if you saw Toni Erdmann a few years ago, that was her movie, and the channel has some of her other films available to watch right now, and I look forward to diving into that for sure.
Yeah, and they also have, at least as we record this, I think they recently are highlighting some Fritz Lang films like Metropolis and I think Hands of Orlok. But then they also have films like, I think it's still on there, childhood favorite for me, and not really an art house film at all, Fly Away Home with Anna Paquin and Jeff Daniels. So if you're looking for something a bit more easier to digest than maybe some films that Criterion highlights or releases, that would be one to do, and I find it surprising but also kind of pleasurable that they put that film on there.
Yeah, I think it's nice for families who maybe their kids are out of school for a prolonged period of time. There's a number of family-friendly movies that you could watch on the channel, Fly Away Home being one of them, and then same director, but The Black Stallion is another great family movie that I remember loving as a kid. Maybe it's just because I loved horses, but I think it's a great family movie, and again, directed by Carol Ballard. A great movie to watch.
Before we wrap things up, I do want to let people know that 25 Years Later is going to be doing a Women Directors Series starting in April. I know they're going to be going until at least the early mid-July. So please check that out. And also, if you want to, you can check out the second episode of this podcast, which does deal with certain films that were about women and or directed or written by women. So please check that out. I'm looking really forward to that. Okay, so that about wraps us up for today. Next month in April, we're going to be talking about Jack Nicholson films that have been highlighted by the Criterion Collection and or the Criterion Channel. So check that out. I'm really excited about that. Until then, I just need to let you know that the Criterion Collectors Podcast was made for 25 Years Later, which can be found at 25yearslatersite.com. And you can also follow it on its Twitter account at 25ylsite. And if you want, you can follow me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat.
And you can follow me at Rosalie Lewis, or you can check out my writing on fthismovie.net.
And until next time, we will catch you guys later.